All right, welcome back, everybody watching online and others. Our last agenda item today is on Hardwiring Innovation, something we teed up at the last PMAD meeting for a discussion topic. We are very fortunate to have two of the most amazing people, one very new, one who's been around the building for a while, coming to join us. Jen Polka, you may have heard that name. One of my favorite, and I consider one of the best TED Talks up online, was delivered by Jen. So I encourage you all to check that out. Jen comes to us from Code for America, an organization in San Francisco, where she was the executive director. She ran Code for America, which is a nonprofit organization that connected innovators with local government to solve innovation challenges at the local level. And there are incredible things. I'm actually going to, as we get into this, I'm going to have Jen actually tell us a little bit about that effort. And we were lucky enough to convince the Code for America board to have her come and spend some time with us as Deputy Chief Technology Officer of the United States and give some time at the federal level in the same way and scale those efforts. Jonathan McBride is one of our most important partners here in the White House, and that he is Deputy of the Office of Presidential Personnel. So from a talent management standpoint, getting the deputies you see here in this room to the new secretaries of the offices and all the presidentially appointed positions, Jonathan's at the forefront of that, and is also probably more relevantly to our conversation today is a key member of our innovation cohort. One of the founders of that group that's really thinking about how do we bring innovative people across the government landscape together on a regular basis to kind of discuss and tackle some of this innovation stuff. If you turn to page 19, actually, why don't I just, Jen, for level setting, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you, Code for America, some fun projects you've seen. I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah, you are.
As I learned this morning, that's what I did.
We could play the TED Talk right now.
Yeah.
12 minutes, I'm sure we have that much time. Most stressful 12 minutes of my life. Code for America came out actually of the work with O'Reilly Media, this notion of Gov 2.0. What would it look like if you were to apply the principles and values of the web in government? And that was a conference. It was also sort of, I think, a way of thinking and approaching the problem that I got to be exposed to. We ended up deciding that the way to do it was to start at the local level, the way that citizens feel they have a closeness to the local government. And what we designed initially, and it's sort of grown since then, we call the Peace Corps for Geeks. So it's really mid-career folks. So average age of our fellows is 30. Who are working in places like Google and Microsoft, take a year off and prepare them in small teams with folks in local government. They spend a year in a very structured process that's based on lean startup and standard design. So when they leave with at least one, but often sometimes many applications, software applications that cities can use, but and those applications are open source, so they spread, which is part of what I talk about in the TED Talk, that way that things start to spread more virally. But really what they're doing is they're leaving the folks in government with new approaches that they can use them when they're gone. And we try to think of ourselves as a virus for culture change. So did you want me to talk about some projects?
If you have any favorites.
Yeah. No, it's really hard. Probably my favorite one last year was something called Blight Status in New Orleans. They obviously have a lot of problems with blight, but more importantly, there's really an information problem because many different silos. So the people who inspect the properties versus people who take the complaints versus all the different inspectors, the hearings, all of this is held in different, not even databases, but spreadsheets, ledgers, people's notebooks, and there was no way that anybody could, except at once a month at these blight status meetings where everyone was in the room, you couldn't tell the status of any blighted property. And the CIO in New Orleans had said, the mayor had asked him to fix this. He said, great, I'm going to need 3 years and about $30 million to do this. We need to upgrade all of our systems. But the fellows went down and they took a very lightweight approach to this, where they pulled all the data out and put it in, use APIs, put let's see, about 6 weeks after their initial interviews, they had something up on the web. Go to flightstatus.nola.gov and type in any address and see the accurate status of any blighted property. So that evolved over the course of the year and ended up being a beautiful sort of consumer-looking type website. But the first instance of it was 6 weeks, not 3 years.
That's awesome.
It really worked with the community.
I feel like clapping down.
Yeah. But the real win there was they worked with the community. People were bought into. People actually use it. It's not something that you build and hope people show up. But there is such an active community, residents, community groups that all use this, and so they really changed the conversation.
And the Code for America team has an unending list of these amazing projects they've been able to do in rapid iteration fashion and do this. The other thing that may sound familiar here is this was the model we used, Todd Park and I, the Chief Technology Officer of the US, and I used to launch Presidential Innovation Fellows. It was based entirely on Code for America, which is how do we rotate private sector entrepreneurs, innovators into government for these fixed amount of times to tackle some innovation challenges that we have. What we all know, and we're going to talk, Jonathan's going to talk a little bit about the reverse of that, potentially rotating people out and some of the pilots and thinking we've been doing about that virtuous cycle we can create. That part of it and this sort of injecting talent in and potentially training out, we know is just a small part of the innovation challenge we face in the federal government. Slide 19, I won't dive through the slides here, but outside of the technical and scientific specializations where we in the government often lead the way, government innovation just isn't sort of embraced for so many reasons. From the range of experience to just the cultural aspects of encouraging entropy. The over and over and over again visiting agencies of government, talking about good management, talking about innovation, talking about process change or doing things in a new way, you often hear, well, that's the way we've always done it. And that is very much prescription for the future for a lot of people out there. And there's an aspect of, that from what we've discussed earlier today on I don't get the return on investment for any savings I drive or innovation I do, that you're just going to cut my budget if I save anything, to just this massive risk intolerance because the approach in government often when faced with a challenge, like you said earlier, there's people out there already doing smart thinking on this stuff. The approach is often, let's go build it ourselves, and that becomes this big multi-year monolithic effort that oftentimes fails and costs hundreds of millions of dollars. We have way too many examples of those things. And so the risk intolerance on these long-term big deliverables is huge, so people tend to not take risks broadly, and so that's a difficult thing. And then I'd say the other aspects of it are to Maurice's comments earlier, in some part there's statutory and regulatory barriers to innovation. Certain laws, you can't go to a federal website and just pop up a form that asks for customer feedback. You have to run a process to get approval to do that if you're doing any quantitative feedback through this law called the Paperwork Reduction Act. There are other things that really impede the ability for multiple agencies to get together from a law standpoint. Now, that never means let's stop trying, let's stop driving, let's stop innovating, but it just brings a variable to bear on the way we look at this. The other thing we often see, and I've been seeing this a lot in delivering kind of policy in the innovation space, is people feeling like they don't have permission, that there's the classic innovator sitting in the basement with a red stapler who's been pushed down the organization chart down to the basement saying, it's not the way we do things, you've got these crazy ideas, stop doing that. Oftentimes we'll issue policy and those people will come out shaking that policy, running down the hall saying, finally I have permission. It's just scaling that broadly is one of the challenges we face as well. And so we had some conversations, Todd Park and I had some conversations with many of you to talk about what to do here, and we're going to we're very much behind thinking about how to foster innovation into a broader and the context that holds in a broader management agenda. And I think that the overarching theme we heard from all of you is really we have to think two things. One is that innovation isn't a certain group. It's not a cohort. It's not a small team of people that you just deploy on innovation things, even though that model is great, and we can, in some extent, an important part of our work is showing the art of the possible and inspiring people that best practices can exist in the realm of innovation, but it's not just one team that moves around and parachutes in, that it's a whole of organization approach, and I think everyone I've talked to said it's got people innovation, process innovation, tech innovation across the board. And then the second part of it was really that we have to think very deliberately around how do we structure, evaluate, and more importantly, reward innovation. And we've done a little bit of that inside government and focusing some efforts at some of the departments on creating innovation awards and bringing that to the level of senior leadership and make sure we're doing that and then thinking about some of the innovations incentives. As one sidebar, one of the things I mentioned we're doing is really thinking about how do we create that virtuous cycle of not only bringing in external talent and trying through the transitive property of having them here train federal employees on how to do things in new ways, but also how do we then take those same federal employees and maybe bring them outside government to experience that and to discuss that, and then we're going to go into some questions as Jonathan did our cross-sector leadership fellow program.
Thanks, Stephen. So you have a slide here. I'll kind of give you the summary highlights, but if you go back 2 years, we started convening groups that were cross-sector to ask this question of A, are you thinking about cross-sector leadership as you think about your leaders in particular? B, are you doing anything about it? And C, is there a role for the federal government to play? And the answer was, yes, we're thinking about it. No, we're not actually doing anything about it. And yes, would you please do something about it from the federal level, if nothing else, to start to convene people who are people of goodwill and actually trying to accomplish and create some regular dialogue cross-sector and an ability to build relationships across sector and ideally start to trade talent across sector. So we started getting people together to think about what that might look like over the last couple of years. Most notably, on March 20th, we had a kickoff event here in the White House for about 100 people who represented a bunch of different sectors. And there was actually a design construction built into the day to try and identify opportunities for two things. One is, what is the role of the federal government and everybody that was attending the meeting? What are the roles that they can play in fostering this movement? Because there are a lot of people out there, starting between Code for America, City Hall Fellows, pilot projects and a lot of different versions that exist out there in the marketplace. What can we do to help to bring them together, to lift up their efforts and kind of put more gas in their gas tank? At the same time, the conversation also was, and the design challenge was also to complete kind of one of the last circuits or last components of a circuit or last miles of these exchange programs, because there are a lot of exchanges going in a bunch of different directions, particularly from private to X. What there seems to be very little outside of the national security world are exchange programs going from public to private sector in particular. And in conversations with a lot of private sector entities, there seemed actually to be a confidence gap or a perception gap about the value of the opportunity of bringing public sector talent into the private sector and what they potentially could add over some reasonable time. So when we had all of these folks together for a day, we asked them to spend some time designing or thinking about what might different exchange programs, both heavy and light, look like. We got a smaller group back together on May 16th to dive a little further into that and come up with some specific ideas. And from that, we got two versions, one light, one heavy, as ideas that potentially people would want to work on. The pilot project is more of a shared learning model, where you would have 20 to 24 top executives on a 12-month program that would be rotational, where each month or every other month they would spend, call it 3 days, in a given sector, in a given geography together, learning both about that sector, but also seeing how that sector does its highest level of professional development. An example might be they spend 3 days in New York City, they go to BlackRock and Goldman and one other financial institution. They learn about the financial markets writ large, but they also get 2.5 days of the best development that those organizations, who obviously have very sophisticated development programs, offer their people side by side with their people. The next month they go to the Midwest and visit a series of manufacturing companies. They go to Silicon Valley. You can kind of see the idea. It's modeled off two things. The Naval War College does a developmental program for emerging colonels who potentially could be Joint Chiefs one day down the road. And they actually do a rotational program. Some of your companies may have hosted them. They tend to go to Wall Street and Middle America and manufacturing facilities and so on, so they can see how the economy really comes to life. There was also a similar program that GE and a bunch of other companies did just with each other, trying to rotate people around their development facilities to see what best practices are, but also give them an opportunity to build relationships with one another. One important component of this, to Stephen's point, we thought it was important that as these people rotate, we wanted to make sure that we picked people and structured a program where not only do they go in and get these experiences for 2 to 3 days every month or every other month, but there would be an educational requirement when they come back to their agency, that there would be a structure set up where they actually share and impart that knowledge to individuals in those agencies. As for the composition of the group, there's two versions. There's one where all 24 are potentially career SES in government. There's another version potentially where you actually have all of the groups, U.S. government as well as the different organizations that are volunteering their time, actually each contribute X number of participants to the group, and the group itself is cross-sector and moves through all of these experiences together and starts to build those relationships.
Now, do these folks have other jobs while they're doing this, or is this a full-time?
They have other jobs. This would be just basically going off for a couple of days every month or every other month.
Right.
The larger idea is actually, as Stephen alluded to, an actual reverse PIF or an exchange program where someone is basically seconded or spends a year or 2 years on a fellowship, having left the U.S. government, going into a corporate entity, having a very structured and specific program offered to them. They go through that experience, and part of their responsibility and part of the design is to have them teach the people they're working around what they know. And then also as they come back a year or 2 years later, there's a responsibility that they teach the people around them in the organization that they left. And an example we often use is a large consumer products company might be figuring out how to develop the west coast of Africa. USAID understands the people and the cultures and the personalities in the west coast of Africa. There's no conflict there of any kind. It's expertise that could be shared back and forth. It's certainly something that could be taught over a year or two, and at the same time have somebody learn about how companies think about such things and then come back to USAID, which would be helpful to them given the number of public-private partnerships they constantly try and create in order to do their work. The second requires obviously a heavier lift from a legal perspective. The Office of Personnel Management, the acting director, is actually looking at it intensely right now to try and understand what the components of it may be. The first one, much like the launch of the PIF program, actually feels a lot lighter to us, where a couple of a small group of companies who would be interested in participating and a handful of agency leaders who would be interested in participating could potentially get it off the ground. Of note, when we came out of the May event, a series of corporate leaders actually raised their hand and said, if you do this, we are already in. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we're interested, and we think it would be really interesting.
Can I just make a suggestion? Because I noticed this on the Jobs Council. The service sector, retail, is the main employer in this country. But yet, like on the Jobs Council, there's no one from the service sectors. There's just from manufacturing. I would strongly recommend, since it's the largest employer of individuals in this country, that you include service sector at the table, right?
It's Liz Smith. She's signing
No,
up for it.
I'm not. I'm not. But I'm always amazed that the Employment Council has no one from the service sector. Well, there's 6,000 people at Facebook. There's several 100,000 people at McDonald's and Walmart. So I think if you really want to understand how the economy works, then you need to spend time at a service sector and retail company in addition to some of the sexier companies where maybe it's more revenue per employee. But the reality is the basic economic of this model of this country for most workers is a lower revenue per employee structure. So I just always notice that's missing. And no, I'm not volunteering us, but it would feel like a Walmart. It would feel like something like that would really be important for you to understand how the economy works, rather than just a Google.
Yeah, the other question I had was small innovative companies. They aren't set up to do exhaustive executive training or anything like that, but just embedding in the culture for even 3 days, you can see a phenomenal difference.
Yeah, it would be, but I just think, it's an unsexy part of this economy, but it happens to employ most of our nation, the service sector.
The shared learning experience, how much authority do they have when they come back? I mean, if they've got all excited, they get all these ideas to make change. Otherwise, it could actually, have just the opposite effect, which is they go, they see all the things that they want to do, and then it's like, but I can't do anything. So are you working in conjunction with the shared learning experience to enable them to have some authority to make changes?
So the thought on the shared learning experiences would actually start with cabinet secretaries who say, I would like to be a part of this program. So the answer is yes, by virtue of starting with them. And it's similar in the corporate world. The representatives we had at the meetings went back to their CEOs, talked to them, and then came back to us and said, our CEO wants to do this. And we thought one component of could be that in the rotational program, and the government would be responsible for doing a 3-day module, by the way. They would have to, through the Federal Executive Institute, develop and deliver on a 3-day module for people to come to Washington, D.C. and learn about how government works. But one of the commitments would be if you are participating, that your CEO also has to present to the group. They actually have to have skin in the game. So they would show up and be a part of the actual event itself. So that is a key part of it. We're placing a lot of emphasis on the shared learning model of it and bringing that back to the place. We have not thought through all the components of what if they want to implement something as a result of those experiences.
Yeah, and I do think, just to follow on the larger program idea, and it sounds like you're still studying it, but this idea of where you land when you come back is going to end up being a pretty important part of how they consider the opportunity. For the individual that's picked, it could be very exciting. On the other hand, it could be very uncertain. I don't know. You may be able to provide a lot of certainty around what they come back to. That would be really helpful, I think, for a program like that.
Otherwise, they may not come back.
Yeah, they may not come back, or there may not be a place for them to come back to. Yeah,
That's scary.
yeah, or they may not want to go.
A comment which sounds a little bit tactical, but nevertheless, I feel compelled to make it. Learning the financial markets and how they work in 3 days is quite a stunning goal. And I think that in addition to just sending them out, getting dipped in a conference room for a few minutes and going back, there needs to be some online supplemental training that they have to do on their own time, so that when they show up, and going the other direction is as important. For somebody to show up here for 3 days and learn how government works, that could be a lifetime endeavor. So I feel like there just needs to be the basics 101, so that they come out and they're not, they don't feel like they landed from Mars trying to figure out
What's the bond?
Yeah.
Have the 3-day session be at the 200, 300 level and
Yeah,
do 100.
exactly. Because you don't want to waste anyone's time, spoon feeding, this is what a stock is, this is what a bond is, this is what a capital market is.
The bill becomes a law.
Yeah. So there needs to be some sea legs you get before you get on the boat, I guess.
Jenna, how does the model work for Code for America? How does it work? Is it all volunteer that's coming out of private sector? Or is it how is it funded?
We're funded primarily by philanthropic dollars, but we also have the cities pay us.
Okay.
It doesn't cover the whole cost of the program. So we actually do get some public, there's 1 or 2 people who come out of government that do it, but mostly it's private sector folks. They get a small stipend, so it's somewhere between, it's truly this volunteer thing.
Yeah, okay.
They make $35,000 for the year.
Yeah.
One element I would just mention is that they're really, and I know with a limited amount of time, they're really doing something with their partners. They're co-creating, and so on both sides, I think, they're not just sort of learning from each other, they're actually learning by doing, and I think that too, we can include that.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that, and where we kind of ended up on the very, very light version was just that, try to be as light as possible, start down a path and learn as we go. But there was a discussion about that. How applied can we make it? Could we give them a challenge over the year that the group works on? And as they're gathering new intelligence in each marketplace, they fold that into the challenge and they have to do some kind of presentation at the end. The other thought was that we could develop a shared sense of what are the components, competencies to be a cross-sector leader in this economy. Start there. Ask each organization that's going to be doing some portion of the training to look at those, say, 5 competencies, and speak to the 2 or 3 that through their training and development programs they already run, they think they can actually explore pretty thoroughly during that period of time. But over the course of the year, you would hit each competency multiple times, but you'd see different people's view of it. So we've thought about different ways to, A, make it more applied, or B, kind of tie it to a competency or value-based model so it sinks in a little bit more.
Yeah, now jump on it and say, let them go solve the shared real estate problem, right? How does the public sector do it and the private sector do it?
Great idea.
No, but to your earlier point, do they have authority to make changes? What's interesting is we shouldn't overstate the sense that people don't have authority to make changes within government. I think they do. Oftentimes they just don't have the tools, the experience, the knowledge, or the relationships. I did a 2-year executive MBA midway through my career, and I tortured my people every week when I came back. The new trick I learned at school. And I just think that part of it is each new trick, like, oh God, what do you study this week?
Right.
And I think that that's the trick. How do we give people the opportunity to get exposure, get those relationships, connections, and then give them, frankly, the confidence to come back and apply them within their organizations?
One other thing I would add to that, and this, again, the group was very governed by this thinking, you can please feel free to push back on it, but there was a keen sense that sitting here today, that when you offer the value proposition of taking public sector talent and loaning it to the private sector, that the response will be negative. There will not be an immediate understanding of what the value of exchange might be there. So one of the reasons that they wanted to start light is they felt like we needed a program to start to chip away at that confidence gap about what public sector talent might offer the private sector. So, and they were very invested in this in the conversation, so that might have had something to do with kind of why we went very light, because that was one of the goals of this light version.
Jonathan, I've been at the Red Cross for 5 years, so I've lived through 2 different administrative turnovers, actually 3 if you count the midpoint with President Obama. And so we always get this flood of resumes for people that want to stay in D.C. You look at these resumes, and the people are so sharp, you don't even have to meet them. So I think so much of it is myth. I think if you threw the right candidates in front of any CEO in the private sector with some of these resumes, they would be surprised. And a number of us have said on a number of occasions just how bright everybody is that we meet in this room. I mean, we've all given keynote speeches to the SCSs because of the training program that was initiated, and the questions you get, this is a group of people that the private sector would embrace, I believe. It's just a little bit of urban myth that, that we just need to crash through.
We agree.
One more comment on the large program idea. And I think our experience is probably parallel across private sector around the intern programs that we have. And you can hire somebody and they can meander around the organization without a whole lot of objectives, and can be not very helpful for the company or for that individual. So setting very specific objectives is back to Jenna's point about this program where they come together and they're working on something very specific. Ends up being an important thing, and the companies that participate should be asked to provide very specific commitments around what that person is going to be doing over whatever that period of time is, 6 months, a year, 2 years, so that person gets applied to it. It's very compelling. They're working hard through that whole period of time and coming back and sharing a lot of important experiences from it.
We agree, actually. I think that's one of the big learnings of the PIF program, was that if you start from a very, very specific challenge program idea, or result, like product or service you want created, then you can design around it. So that, for the larger program, that is definitely built in.
Without signing any of you up to the large program, have we thought through the ingredients that it would take to get people like you to sign up? Or what's missing in what you've heard so far? I know it's very high level, but are there aspects that would it have to really be about the person coming in and have to provide intrinsic value in some very specific way to your organization. I always think of the FDA employee, not that we do this from a conflict standpoint, but the FDA employee going to work at a medical technology company, and they get application process learning, and the person understands, wow, if we took down these 4 barricades, we could foster innovation in this country. And those are sort of the...
Yeah. I mean, I think this idea of matching kind of skills and needs would be really important, although it's pretty hard. So the example you used in, was it South Africa? Is that the West Africa? A great example. I think there'd be a lot of companies that are very compelled by that type of idea. So that there is some value that's coming back to the company from the process. For us, when we hire interns, we're evaluating them, and we want to know how well they're going to do if we put them in a job permanently. And so you don't really have that benefit. But we also get particularly as you bring younger people into the organization, and they're on the bleeding edge of how they're using technology in their lives. For us, it's fantastic. But again, so you get a lot of value out of just somebody's different thinking about things. And I think we could probably justify it just based on that different thinking that's coming. But I think the matching the West Africa idea, those things, that would be very compelling for companies.
Can I throw in a thought here? I think it goes along to this, and it suggests that Gail's point isn't really tactical. It's serious. I mean, and to Liz's point, look, we're in the customer service business too in the government. And if you had a customer service orientation, that would be like our National Park Service could learn a lot from your company in terms of how you present yourself to the public and all of that. And the other thing, what Steve just talked about, one of the real problems that people have with the federal government is our regulatory interface with people, and we're searching for ways for our regulators in an appropriate way to understand how industry looks when we do deep water, permitting and oil and gas permitting and solar permitting, for our people to understand the perspective of the private sector, and frankly for the private sector to understand what we have to go through in order to do this in the right way, and frankly for the private sector to avoid litigation. I think it'd be powerful, but it should be at a high level. This is not not in the weeds, but get high level people who can start talking in a different way about these activities. I think you get a lot more embrace from top levels of the agencies if we're seeing, like you're seeing, that you're really going to get something that has immediate applicability, as opposed to, frankly, going to J.P. Morgan and learning about bonds.
I think that as you were talking, I was thinking about exactly. I think the kind of regulatory empathy and the impact going both ways. So I'll give you a great example. As we look to expand in China, just how difficult is it to do work, to do to be competitive, to be globally, having that perspective, you could substitute that for anything, having that perspective on both sides as to why there's some of these U.S. kind of, regulations, policies that we feel like, well, gosh, that makes us not as competitive as, say, another country that doesn't have that. But then understanding likewise. So to the extent that there could be more regulatory empathy on both sides, both private to public and public to private, I think would be huge.
I think a great filter mechanism, you could turn to the SES that you want to target and say, here are a list of companies that said they would participate. So provide us with an application that explains what you could provide that company. So then they have to research the company, understand what their biggest challenges are. So what would you bring to the table? And what problem of theirs can you help solve? And what do you want to learn from the experience? And it's almost like a combination of personal statement and case for change. And you hand that to the company and then let them figure out, is there value here? And that way half the legwork is done before they show up. And you filter out the best and brightest. And I think that will also get rid of that, if you get people to just suspend their disbelief when they see it, then they'll say, you know what, I could actually use help in that area.
I'd do the reverse as well, Gail. I mean, I think to your first point that there'd be a lot of interest, companies can also say, hey, we would love to get expertise and learn about these 8 areas. So I think, rather than put the onus only on the SES. I think put the onus on any company that wants to participate, which is what are the 15 ways in which you can benefit.
So that came up in the room, was this chicken and egg of, do you start with the need of the companies and then match the talent? Or do you look across government and say, where are we deep in expertise around supply chain and procurement and so on and so forth? Like you pick areas where we go very, very deep and say, okay, let's pick the very best among those people and then see what companies would show up and say, well, we've got use for them to come and educate our people on how they do things over a 1 year period.
I think you do both. It's sort of like a Match.com when you're done.
But I would just emphasize that it has to be a substantive role. I mean, you know, sometimes fellowships or fellows or interns or whatever you call them can just get lost in the shuffle if they don't have a real objective or a real, you know, reporting to the CEO usually doesn't work. You know, the CEO doesn't have time to manage an extra person. You know, get them in a real department where they can learn something and where they can offer some help, because otherwise, I've just seen it happen too many times. You bring in MBAs or you bring in folks from the outside and they don't have a portfolio and they just, as someone else said, wander around for a year. And it doesn't help anybody.
I think on the chicken and egg front, I do think it'd be helpful if you could lay out, you could, as a part of a process that a company's going through to commit or kind of apply to participate, laying out the areas that you're deep in, that you really feel like you're deep in, and also laying out areas if you wanted help in real estate, as an example, you wanted to get some private sector expertise in real estate. So it's kind of need-based, and also this is where we're really deep and can be helpful. Lay it out, and then let the companies apply, if you will. Here's what we think here's where we can get benefit. Here's where we think we can get, we can deliver value to a person that would have that expertise.
What are next steps on this, John?
I think our hope is that we do two things. So we go out and find a coalition of the willing in the private sector for the light shared learning experience model. In the meantime, we've actually already tasked the cohort members to go talk to their cabinet secretaries and try and find a handful of cabinet members who want to be part of a trial program, and hoping that we get a core number on both sides, then try to then determine what the actual program would look like, and try something small over the next year, but that gives us a little bit of momentum to potentially try something larger 6 to 12 months.
This group is back together, I think, in September. So it would be great to reconvene and talk about where we are on that. Great.
And one of the things we'd also like to do is to reach out to you all individually to tap into some of the folks inside your organizations just to help us as we continue to develop this idea and to pressure test some specific questions as we do have them.
That'd be great.
Anything else, Jonah?
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Fantastic.
That concludes our agenda.
It definitely does. Again, as the designated federal officer, thank you very much. We are going to close the meeting now because we have a couple of administrative items that we'd like to talk about, which are off camera. So thank you very much for all of those who have been listening to the webcast. And this concludes our meeting of the President's Management Advisory Board. Thanks.